the first speaker, I will jump directly to Arne-Jørgen Berre. He is the one who is going to introduce the topic of data spaces. He is a senior scientist in SINTEF Digital, but he is also an innovation director at the NorwAI, so Artificial Intelligence Network, a huge one here in Norway, international, I even believe. He's been involved in multiple standardization works in bodies. He's involved in big data work, and also he's the scientific director of Iliad and involved in DITTO, or the UN in decade for ocean science. So Arne-Jørgen, I think I will give the floor to you now with that introduction. So welcome, and go ahead and introduce us to data spaces. You're muted, Arne-Jørgen.
Now I should be unmuted. And
Correct.
I'll show the first slide here. There.
Yes.
You shouldn't see that also. Very good. So I'll talk about European Ocean Data Space concept in the context of the Iliad Digital Twins of the ocean. The context for the Iliad Digital Twins of the ocean is how to bring a lot of relevant data from many different sources into the context of digital twins, plural, that is, not only one twin. We see that there will be a lot of digital twins of the ocean, and they need to be managed as well as the data, combined with models, both analytical AI, machine learning, as well as physical models, and various kinds of visualizations and interactions. Today we'll have the focus on the bottom line here, where we talk about a common European ocean data space. We do see that there is a huge amount of data and data sources available related to ocean data, and subsets of this will be required for any digital twin of the ocean, in particular localized or sector-specific twins for certain areas. And for that, we started to look into the concept of European data spaces, which we are sharing, say, similar requirements and wishes with. So the context for this will be the common European data spaces, of which there are many in progress. And in particular, the Iliad project is under the Green Deal program. So for Iliad, it's quite natural to look at the Green Deal data space, which actually will be presented later today from two projects, the GREAT project and the All Data for Green Deal project. There is also other projects like the Agri data space that share various commonalities. And one of the points here is that between these data spaces, there is also a need for interoperability. For instance, in the ocean, we also have ocean energy, wind farms, offshore wind farms, wind energy, which will have data in the energy data space. And this is also related to the ocean data space. So it's not only these single data spaces, but there is also interoperability between those. So this is all evolving, and none of these have finalized yet. There is a lot of funding from the Digital Europe program for some of these data spaces shown here, and this is in current progress. So what we want to do now is to kind of visit the opportunities to get synergies with these activities, also for the digital twin of the ocean, which is, the ocean is not one of those dedicated data spaces, but it could be in the future, and it certainly would benefit from being part of the Green Deal data space, as well as maybe expanding beyond this. So there are many various inputs into the data spaces concept, and one foundation can be found in some of these references here. Essentially, we can say that the data space concept is partially a European concept focused on by different organizations and the Commission. We saw the European Common Data Space Initiative. We have also the International Data Spaces Association and Gaia-x, that have provided input to a report to the OpenDI project called Design Principles for Data Spaces. The BDVA, the Big Data Value Association, and the ADRA, the AI Data Robotics Association, has contributed to a number of recent books on designing data spaces and data spaces design, deployment, and future directions. If you go beyond this concept, perhaps a lot of similarities can be found with the data mesh architecture concept, where you also can find a number of books and references that has been done, say, outside of this community. It's basically our data management in the context of many sources and where it's not likely that all the data can be put into one common data lake, which you might do if you have full control and can get the data you need for a certain purpose. So when we look at the broadness of ocean data, we do not believe that all of this data can go into one data lake, but we do need to manage all of this and be able to also identify the data needed for certain purposes, such as various digital twins. We also see that the design principles for data spaces are relevant, such as data sovereignty. The owners of the data should be able to manage this. It should be aspects of a decentralized infrastructure. It cannot really be centralized. We need to involve both public and private data and need to have a way of handling data, both open data and protected data. And all of these are design principles that have been illustrated in some of these references above. And that also has been input to the initiative of the European data spaces, where there are many activities going on, and that's what we want to focus on today with some of these initiatives and supporting projects, looking a bit on the reference model of the international data spaces and Gaia-x and corresponding projects in the data space field, as well as discussing various aspects of how and when these can be combined with data lakes and other data storage solutions, and the advantages of this in the context of the creation of digital twins. So, as I said, a number of projects has already been started. One of these on the Digital Europe program is the Data Spaces Support Center, which started in October last year. So a number of the projects we are now talking about started just a few months ago, but they are now available in terms of their ambitions and motivations. So we will come back to this later in the discussion. Also to the underlying reference architectures that we have been looking at. So those that are familiar with Gaia-x would have seen kind of this X picture before. We have tried to relate this architecture to the needs of the Iliad digital twins of the ocean, which will actually be multiple twins on the upper level here. But in order to get access to the data that is needed for the data representation of a certain digital twin, it's good to have an ecosystem that provides open access or maybe restricted access to various data providers. This can also go from model providers and service providers, and an infrastructure that handle this with respect to identity and trust, federated catalogs, sovereign and controlled data exchange, and compliance with interfaces. So what we will be looking at is how these technologies that are emerging around this, data ecosystem, can be taken to the advantage for the building of digital twins of the ocean. And in that context, we now are exploring the relationship to projects like GREAT and the All Data for Green Data Space and the Green Deal and others, such as the Data Spaces Support Center, to see how these projects can support each other. Just to give a little illustration of some of the underlying technology concepts, if we take a look at the initial architecture from the industrial data space, IDSA, as it was developed already a number of years ago, the idea is to have an ecosystem where data consumers and data providers can interact based on search for data and services and models in an open environment supported by brokerage and clearinghouse services, handling identity, authentication, authorization, access control, supporting semantics and vocabularies of the data that will be exchanged, and also how the data is reflected in services and models, and do that in a way where there can be control of ownership and access control for data. So we see this as a useful stepping stone into the data spaces, and in the Iliad architecture, this is the kind of high-level conceptual architecture. We see a staging of data before we get to the digital twin, data stored data on the front end and the models to the right, because there are so many data sources and data providers that have data on different levels in different ways, that we see a need for an intermediate ocean data space here that can handle the access and manage the interfaces towards all of these underlying systems, so that they can live both independently but also provide data as needed, supporting semantics, semantic harmonization, ontologies and other things that are needed for their federation and interoperability, and be able to serve this data into the data lakes and data stores that will be selected areas for data that will be in certain digital twins that will be part of this ecosystem. So we have underlying technologies that are now being, say, developed for this. We will also try to harmonize with other digital twin initiatives, such as the European Digital Twin of the Ocean, that has a dedicated data lake for the data that goes into, say, a more global European twin. And also other data that comes for the particular pilots and applications that we have that are for other areas. So we see that an ocean data space will be able to handle that concept in the same way as the common European data spaces will do that in various areas. So what we will do now is to seek synergies with projects that are dedicated for this. So in the context of Digital Europe, one project has already started a few months ago, the Great Green Deal Data Space Foundation project. And we're looking at how we can contribute with use cases for this. And we'll also hear more about the great project later today. And then we have the All Data for Green Deal, which started as a Horizon Europe or a project outside of Digital Europe, but as a Horizon project that also is dealing with data for Green Deal and semantic interoperability. So both of these projects are, of course, quite relevant as they are directly addressing this data space concept, and we'll see how that can adapt and be used in the context of the elements needed for the Green Deal, which then Iliad is a project in the community of. So that's the context setting, and what we hope now is to also hear from the great project, and first from the All Data for Green Deal, which might also mention some of the other data space project initiatives, so that we can take advantage of the evolutions of these and actually view the digital twin of the ocean as a user of the data space technology that will evolve from these projects. So that's my introduction to the concept of data spaces in the context of the digital twins of the ocean.
Thank you very much, Arne-Jørgen. That gave us a flying start. And thank you also to those who have participated in the poll. I'll publish that. While I'm publishing it, please, if you have questions to Arne-Jørgen that pops up right now, please ask them in the chat, and we will come back to a deeper discussion after all of the presentations. But if there are questions for clarification, for instance, that we can do immediately. But also for you to remember your question, it might be a good idea to write it in the chat. So I will end the poll now, and then I will share the results with you. Can you confirm that you see the results?
Yep.
Yep, good. So you see that there are actually a few of you, 14% of you already use data spaces, which is interesting. It would be great if you can say something, which data space and what context that is in the chat. We would love to hear that. Interestingly, also that 44% of you are planning to use data space. So it's a hot topic. There are 23% who are not quite clear, ready to are planning yet, but consider to do it. Somebody is not going to do it, and somebody is 14% doesn't know. So thank you very much. This was very interesting to see. Do share the data spaces that you are using. That will be super interesting. And even if you are planning to use which data space or what context is that, that will be lovely. Thank you for that.